she's unable to perform this dance, that is without the help of some outsourced cheap underpaid labor, right? So that is essentially what the film is exploring, um, from my point of view. um, so like I said, I will structure the talk into two parts: the things that I liked and the things that I did not like. So I'll start with the things that I liked. Like I said, I found the film very interesting. Uh, the most important thing I think the film does, for me, is that it acknowledges the affective component of, this maid madam relationship. And I'm going to use this term, maid madam, just to, because I think it helps me aptly describe the way that the relationship has been shown in the film. Um, so I think what is doing, it's kind of opening up a space to navigate the realities of this relationship, which ideally should be a space of professional transaction, right? Where there is a certain amount of work to be done, and there is a certain amount of money to be paid, and that's where it should end. But that's not how a lot of women I know experience it. It's They need that cheap labor, they need somebody's help to keep the house the way they like it, but at the same time, that dependence drives them mad, right? Um, and in the way that I see, even in social sciences or popular culture, the way that the relationship, or let us say this dynamic between a middle class woman and the woman that she's employing to get chores done at home, there are two ways of looking at that relationship, or there are two pools of language, let us say, to refer to that. One is the kind of language that dehumanizes the maid, right? Saying that they always take leave, they don't care, they are very clever. I mean, we are the ones who are oppressed, right? That kind of narrative also exists. And the other kind of language or discourse around this social reality, or this exchange, or this relationship that exists, is that it must be professional, it must be transactional, where everybody has to treat each other with courtesy and respect, which of a very sterile form, um, which from what I know is very difficult to achieve for a lot of people, right? So what I'm trying to say is that the film is opening up a space in between these two ways of charting or looking at this relationship, and it's saying that it can be a little bit more complex, and it is legitimizing this space to talk about this reality, right? Although the power imbalance remains, and that is something that must be addressed, and that is something that I hope eventually will happen. But I think what the film is doing is it's creating a legitimate space for having this kind of dialogue, which is real, which is not based on some utopian or idealistic notions, right? So that is what I find really significant about what the film is trying to do. The second thing that I liked about the film is that, in showing how the second thing that I liked about the film is the way that it's kind of navigating anxiety about changing gender relations in a middle class home, right? So you see Rani's husband within the film saying that I'm just making tea in this women centric kind of narrative. We see how there are attacks on his masculinity, which he evades by pretending to be in a lift and not being able to hear, not being able to listen to what his mother is saying at some point, or not being able to listen to what his wife is saying at some point. We also see the man in the house, right? Like I said, changing gender relations. We also see him participating in the chores at home, participating in the kind of work that is happening at home. So I like the way that the film is trying to navigate this anxiety. Um, and this brings me to the third thing that I liked about the film, which is that it visualizes the amount of labor it takes just to maintain a house, right? There is just so much work that goes in keeping house, especially if you want to keep it aligning to a certain notion of what a house is supposed to look like. Correct. So when we talk about work at home, we often talk about cooking and cleaning, but there are so many other small things that need to be done, which are always weighing on the person responsible for maintaining the house, mostly the woman, which is filling of water bottles or cleaning of the fridge, right? So I love that the film is able to visualize that. Um, and it is also able to show us just how much work a working woman must do before she's stepping out of the house and before she has to jump into another professional or a work setting, let us say, not professional, um, and how much she has already had to endure before her workday begins. So I love that the film is able to do that effectively. Just one second. Yeah. Uh, which again, now the next thing that I liked about the film is just the kind of performances or the a lot of people have appreciated the comic timing of the film, and I also liked it, though I am not entirely sure about, I'm a bit I'm still trying to figure out what is it that made the film funny for me, because obviously I'm also speaking from a place of privilege, right? I'm somebody who employs people at home. So that is something I've still not figured out, and that is something I'm trying to figure out. But I love the performances in the film, especially by Mukta Barve, who's playing the protagonist Rani. Um, and I see her role of this every Marathi woman. I see that as a kind of a continuation of the kind of roles that Mukta Barve has done in other Marathi films. So if I were to read her as a star text, right, she has played similar roles in romantic comedies like Mumbai, Pune, Mumbai, where she becomes this carrier of a hybrid identity, a Marathi woman who is very modern and contemporary, but at the same time very traditional and rooted, in certain aspects. So I read that and I find that the performance somehow it works, that is something else I liked, which also now brings me to the things that did not work for me in the film. Um, so just like her other performances of every Marathi woman that I have seen with Mukta Barve, this is also every Marathi woman that is marked by her location. In other films, there is also caste. Apart from class, caste I found a bit difficult to read in this film because the last names of the characters have not been mentioned, if I'm not wrong. And but she is very much marked by her middle class or upper class location, right? Who's living in this gated community and is working in a bank, and so on. So, which informs also the gaze of the film for me, right? This same location of middle class or upper class position, which informs the gaze in the entire film. So while the film is also trying to make an effort in humanizing this maid or the house help, right, by showing us their living conditions or by showing us how difficult it is for Asha to navigate, just um, her everyday commute and to make sure that she's on time. While the film is trying to humanize um, Asha also for us, um, it also shows her home as a site of domestic violence, as if domestic violence is something that doesn't happen in middle class homes or upper class homes. And the most pressing calamity that can happen in middle class home, I mean, they show one is an accident, right? And the other one is that you no longer have cheap help at home, right? And as you will notice in both cases, the family members are not to blame. It just happens. So I think the gaze of the film in that way makes me very uncomfortable. Uh, the other thing that I didn't like about the film, Yeah. The other thing that I didn't like about the film, and this comes through also, I would like to kind of add to what I said about how the gaze of the film is marked by its location. We see that although Asha is a figure who is humanized, correct? Even in her interactions with other people who are working as house helps within the society, we see the amount of surveillance that they are subjected to. We see how they are shooed away from occupying public spaces. The gaze still remains, a gaze that others house helps. This comes through especially in the way that Rani makes her speech once both she and Asha win the award for at that yoga spardha, right? Um, and we see how Asha merely becomes a kind of appendage. Asha becomes merely a cog. Asha becomes a device that is meant for Rani to fulfill her dreams, as if her own dreams and aspirations, as if Asha's own dreams and aspirations don't matter. And this point comes through even more strongly for me when we see Rani make that speech, that very explicit speech about how behind every successful man is a woman, and behind every successful uh, woman is a maid, right? So even if she's trying to say that I'm also a working woman and Asha is also a working woman, we see that very smoothly there is a kind of primacy that is given to Rani and her dreams and roles. Which brings me to the last thing that I want to say, which is one observation related to the form. What I found interesting about the film is that it's taking devices of a romance. It's taking the tropes of a romance film and it's kind of transposing the maid and madam relationship onto that, right? So you see how there is an effort to say that there was a love at first sight or a connection at first sight, and how there is a breakup, and how eventually there is a patch up, and you see that uh, flush of exhilaration, on Rani's end when she realizes that, oh, Asha has come back into her life. But then if you just probe a little deeper, you realize that her excitement is merely not because her excitement is not because Asha, the person, is back, but the convenience that Asha offered in keeping the house the way that she wanted is back, in giving her some amount of leisure and time. So um, it is not actually Asha that she's in love with, she's in love with this idea of domestic bliss where the house is clean and everybody has home cooked meals and you know where Rani is able to work along with her husband, and she's also able to follow her dreams and find time for yoga while someone else is doing the work for her, right? So that is one thing that I noticed about the film. I would love to know what the rest of you thought about the other aspects of the film in terms of its form. Before I end, I just have two more things to add, which is I noticed that the film is kind of juggling some kind of tension around two ideas. The one is this idea of work of a working woman, right? And by working woman here, I'm referring to the middle class working woman that is Rani, because while the film again is making an effort to talk about how women get caught up in their roles of wife, mother, daughter, and they end up giving up things that they like, whether it is dance or yoga or drawing, right, or whatever else it might be, whatever it is that they're passionate about. The film also, we see that it's trying very hard to find a justification for why women are working outside the house. So, wherever they mention, right, generally we hear that people talk about, oh, you have to study, you have to get married, you have to have a kid. But in this film, what I noticed was interesting was there was an addition of a one more thing, which is you have to study, you have to get a job, you have to get married, you have to have a child, and you have to buy a house. So there is a home loan, right, which then forces a woman to also work, which then this home loan necessitates two working members in a family. As if that home loan were not there, probably the woman need not have worked. So that is one tension, that the way that the film is trying to justify why a woman has to go out and work at all. right? And the other tension that I noticed is, while the film is trying to humanize Asha for us, is trying to humanize house helps for us, right? And it is also at the same time trying to justify, not trying to justify, trying to etch out a secondary role for Asha. So, in trying to do both of these things, a very interesting image that stood out for me is that when Asha comes back to work for Rani, we see that Rani becomes the literal queen, occupying a throne, and Asha comes to her help as an angel or as a pari, right, as a fairy. So, I mean, her role, there is a kind of mystification of that role of a laborer or somebody who's often offering labor, right? How do you juggle those two things, humanizing them, but at the same time making sure that they're only there for to further a middle class woman's ambition or wishes or desires. So I found the use of that fairy very interesting in that because I realized that the film had to find a way of kind of making sense of what it was trying to do. So those were just some of my observations. I would love to know what the rest of you thought. And if you have any questions or if whatever I said was not clear and you want me to speak more about it, I would do it very happily.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Pradnya, for flagging so many different aspects of the film, both in terms of its theme and form. So it's now open for discussion. And before I actually open it out, I would like to just say a few things, my own opinion about the film or what stood out for me. In many ways, you have already said it, Pragnya, but what I thought was the film actually shows us quite clearly and quite spectacularly how the wealth of the middle and the upper middle class sections of society is generated through the labor of the working class. So that for me was extremely interesting. And also the what you termed as the maid madam relationship. That I think was portrayed in a really complex manner because on the one hand you have this woman, the madam, being very concerned about Asha Tai and asking, she has noticed the bruise and she's asking, what is this? But at the same time, when she is hassled about her daughter's and husband's accident, she has absolutely no qualms about actually assaulting her physically. The way she picks her up and drags her out and throws her out of the house. And then this constant, you know, uh, taking her in, throwing her out, taking her in, throwing her out. It keeps happening. So it comes across as a very, instrumentalist kind, transactional kind of a relationship where it seems to be need based, somebody as if Asha Tai is someone who is just dispensable, you use her when she is needed and throw her out when you feel that she's not needed or she's not doing the work as per your requirements. So that I thought was very interestingly done. And thirdly, the use of Bollywood tropes, and I think to some extent that is where the comedy lies, where I mean she dons the role of Gabbar Singh. I mean, she's playing the role of Gabbar Singh, fully costumed and all of that. And there are a lot of other, intertextual references to Bollywood films as well. So that seemed, and it is amazing that, a film that has absolutely no romantic plot in it becomes such a huge commercial success. So it's now open. Anyone can come in. Yes, Nikhila, please go ahead.
Pradnya, thanks very much for suggesting the film. It was a very, very interesting watch. I mean, quite funny in places. And I also, like you, wondered about, the form. What makes it funny? Is it the actor? Because the issue doesn't seem so funny. So it looks like there's a certain way. And having watched Harishchandrachi Factory, I thought this is probably the manner in which the director, kind of in a kind of slapstick way explores somewhat serious issues and so on. About I think it's coming at a moment. This film is coming at a moment where what we know historically as the development of the modern domestic space, where the woman learned to keep house, cook, became house proud, became the housewife. So this is a moment which is kind of looking back at that moment, where the woman embodied in some ways the house. Now, what happens when the woman evacuates herself from that space? So does the ideal still remain, or does it collapse? The crisis seems to be that one is still hankering for the domestic. Now, who is hankering for the domestic is also an important question to ask. So there is still that need for a particular kind of domestic, your own kitchen, your own house. Your house has to be kept clean, beds have to be made, and so on and so forth. And so who will do it is the question. So if the woman was expected, the wife was expected to do this role, it looks like now the wife wants her own wife. And who will do it in some ways with the same love, because that is again something that is one of the qualifications of Asha Tai, that she's almost like a second mother. She's not just a professional coming for money, and so it's almost like she's part of the family. So it is as if it is looking for someone who will fill this slot that is emptied by the housewife. So it's trying out, different kinds of people, and someone who comes for a selfie and to make it work on social media, and someone who comes with whatever. So, and Asha Tai fits the bill. She can perform in the space evacuated by Rani effectively, without another very important aspect, without becoming any kind of a threat in that space. So she is someone who should know her space in that domestic space. She is a house help. She cannot become Malkin. You have so many films where the house help kind of becomes cheeky and upwardly mobile and whatever. So so she knows her space. That is also one of the qualifications. She can fill in when required. She also knows what her space is when it's required. So she's effectively, kind of desexualized, unambitious with regard to this household. It's not like she wants to replace Asha Tai. Asha Tai doesn't want to replace Rani. None of those. So she's someone who knows what her space is. And whenever the tension seems to be, whenever there is a sense of loss of control. That also I was thinking was a very important part of the tension. So the loss of control over the space is gets kind of pinned to the loss of control over Ashatai. And so the need to control the space by regulating Ashatai, her phone, her coming in at the whatever time. So all those also get tied to it. So I thought that was coming through very, very in a very interesting way. As you said, the life of Ashatai. So this is one that we know. The life of Ashatai that we get to see is the hovel, and so it's almost like it's a journey of self-discovery for Rani, not just discovery about her. So because she's also thinking, okay, so we are in the same struggle. So we are part of the same struggle. So she's not just, so it's like a journey of self-discovery as she walks through the hovel. And what happens there? So Ashatai's house is a home of gender disparity. The man hits and demands, and it is terrible. Whereas here, this is the new man who shares work, who is ready to step up his game in the domestic sphere. So but probably there were essential kind of stereotypes. Given that it's a popular genre, some of it is for the laughs. Not all of it is it's also entertaining. So and it's not really about examining an issue, though, as you said, you flagged many important issues that it brings up. Even while we laugh, even while we kind of go along with the funny flow. I think I'll stop here. Very interesting. Thanks for suggesting the film, Pradnya. Yeah.
Thank you, Nikhila. Pragnya, if you wish to respond to what we have said until now, you may do so, or if you wish to, you can wait and gather more responses and then respond, whatever you wish.
I'll just quickly respond. I'm just
Okay.
very happy to know that you also found it funny, because I was wondering whether the humor would translate, because some of it is, based on wordplay. And so I'm glad to know that, you also enjoyed the film and found it funny. And the first point that you raised, Geeta ma'am, about the complexity of the relationship, I absolutely agree. There is a certain complexity, which is why, so you see how she remembers her son's birthday, and how she lets her sit on the sofa, or so there's definitely a complexity, or how she is given keys to the house, and how she doesn't have to get her food, she can help herself to the food. When I was looking at all this, I was thinking about some study that a think tank here in Bangalore has done, about how they've done some empirical work in this, and they say that people say that they try to they try to give left as basically they try to couch these acts as acts of compassion, employers, when they're actually not acts of compassion. They're just they might have some food left over, for example, and they want someone to finish it, right? But like you said, what I liked about the film is that it is trying to show through this complexity that there could be something more to that relationship. There is a possibility. Um, and the other point that Nikhila ma'am made about, this whole evacuation of that space and the loss of control, that is also something very interesting. So the ideal house help kind of gets defined by, all those other women who step in when Asha is not working for Rani. That they should not be slow, they should not be too fast, they should not feel so comfortable that they order things So yeah, very interesting. Yeah, thank you for highlighting that.
You have to unmute yourself, Geeta.
Yeah, sorry. Any other responses?
If I may add just one small point which I forgot.
Sure.
So in many like Kannada films, the house help is not this goody kind of, it is not just someone who helps in the house. She also might instigate the things in the house, and therefore the instigator of the plot as well. Whereas here, this disempowerment, of Asha Tai, as you said, the gaze is from the point of view of Rani. That I thought was somewhat different, So when the house help is not a bechari who's just, who'll do what is demanded of a housewife. And a housewife does all this as cheap unpaid labor. So this is still cheap paid labor. So probably that's the only difference. Yeah. So the servant figure, the trope is used somewhat differently in many Kannada films. I was thinking. I had in mind an actor called Umashri, who's done many of these roles in Kannada.
Yeah, any other responses? The Great Indian Kitchen, of course, is a very different film, but that focus on the domestic space reminded me, like when I was watching this film, I kind of kept recalling that as well, the woman and then her space within this domestic space and how she negotiates this space and all of that. Here, of course, she's also simultaneously negotiating the outside world. What about the others? Would you like to? Rajan, any comments, questions? Madhurima, Murli Krishna.
Yeah, I just want to say
Yeah.
a little bit about
Sure.
the question of the woman coming out and having to work for, maybe now it's the the flat or the space of the house, right? And when it comes to the working woman, right, they've always been coming out and nobody asked all these questions. So I think that comes out very strongly. And in many ways, the film actually is a tragicomic, because the tragedy actually of Asha is not really noted till the end, and even the ending is somewhat very stilted, because it shows that, oh, which is accommodated, and it's made. And even that little girl says, well, I'm going to be a house help when I grow up. Yeah. And that's never been encouraged. And yeah, so there's a lot of gearing towards the end at that level, right? But all the getting of the prize and the giving of the scooter and all those things seems really unreal, right? And probably Marathi films were not like that. So that's probably from the Hindi movie or the popular Bollywood movies it's coming, right? That's what it's, yeah.
Okay, thank you, Rajan.
Yeah, so I think, could I respond quickly?
Yeah, sure. Please go ahead.
So I think, yeah, I mean, there is I know a lot of people are experiencing this crisis of, not being able to find somebody to work in your house. And I think, yeah, I mean, those things where the child is saying, I want to be a house help, and, the husband is saying, yes, in the future, this is really going to be something. So, yeah, that seems a little bit, uh, insensitive, if I might, or just out of touch. Although, I mean, I know overall as a film, it is very entertaining and so on. But I think these are a few of the things that I found a bit, you know, um, tone deaf, if I could say that. I think the other one thing that I kind of have been thinking about is, and it's not just this particular film, but I see this even in Marathi serials, this whole desire of showing a woman driving, right? Like it's as if progress is when a woman can drive, right? And obviously, the progress has to be, in bunches, and it has to be compartmentalized. It has to be sanctioned by the family. So the husband will encourage her to drive. And so you see that in Marathi serials. I've seen that in one maybe Marathi serial, I Bhekai Karte, I think that one. And even here, there is this obsession with just driving. And I just find that very fascinating somehow that. I mean, yes, there are practical benefits to everybody finding their own means of transport, but how that becomes a sort of easy resolution for the film to say how, Asha is now coming on time, but at the same time, their bickering continues. So, yeah.
Any other responses? Would anyone like to speak? Yagnashri, Sridhar, Tarkeshwar, would you like to say something? Nobody wants to speak. Yeah, Rajan, go ahead.
Yeah, and I think that also Asha Tai gets almost into the role of self-actualization when she refuses to come back, and then of course Rani throws a fit and all that thing. But also there's a whole question about Rani throwing a fit and being a kind of a control freak, right? Which comes across in the movie, and maybe she's actually going towards a mental problem which is not which is around and everybody accepts it, and that's it. So that's another curious aspect which probably we have not discussed, right?
Hmm. Okay. No more. Yes, Tarkeshwar, please go ahead.
Yeah, if no one else is there, I thought I will come
Please,
in.
please. Yeah, please.
No, one is the discussion is quite interesting. The trope of romanticism and that is being invoked here between the maid and the quote unquote the madam. Yes, it reminds me of the late 80s and early 90s films of the working class man and the factory owner and the daughter. So here the daughter is missing. The way these films tried to resolve the issue of capitalism and the exploitation of labor and then the problems of the labor in a kind of amicable way seems to be at play here now in a different context of housemaid and the quote unquote madam. In that sense, it is I thought is interesting. So there seems to be a larger a trope that is being implied to nullify the what the capitalism perceives as exploitation, but doesn't want to acknowledge it as exploitation. That is quite interesting. Here too, as many others have pointed out, uh, Asha Tai is alone. Uh, she's not in terms of part of the union. Uh, while there is a support system for uh, the madam, either are office colleagues or in-laws or the family members, uh, Asha Tai is rendered completely helpless. Uh, though there is a scene where she meets other maids and they talk about it, and they also advise her, but she doesn't want to take their advice, and she's not part of that kind of group where they will have discussions what is best for them, what is not best for them. Uh, it also ties up with what Nikhila was saying about other kinds of women who know how to exploit the loophole within the capital system. In a sense, what James Scott would have said as weapons of the weak. So that weapons of the weak is completely absent here. Of course, the larger weapon of unionization and then the protest, uh, better negotiation, that is absent. Even so-called the weapons of the weak is also absent. I think in that sense, this film is interesting in that sense. And I think there's not much to say about it further. But why it is coming up now? Uh, there were memes and comments in social media, but a full-length movie was, I think, due, and now it has come out. And that too in Marathi is quite interesting. Thank you. Thank you for the session. And, thank you for the discussion.
Thank you, Tarkeshwar. Any more responses, questions? Okay, if there are no more, we will end the session here. Thank you all very much for logging in. And thank you, Pradnya, for suggesting this film and for introducing it for us. Thank you all. Good night and have a nice Sunday.
Thank you everyone for watching the film.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Pradnya.
Yeah, my
Thank you. Good night.
Good night. Good night.